I admit, I was proud of my own looks. Why wouldn't I be? But you took that away. You destroyed the beauty. So now, face the beast. Modern Queen Tales presents. This mask only hides power. Remember to like, subscribe, and above all, enjoy. Without further ado, let's give these pages a flip. The chemical smelled of bitter almonds and burnt copper right before it hit my skin. I stood in the alley behind the velvet lounge, waiting for my driver. The assailant stepped out from the shadow of the dumpster. He wore a heavy black coat and a plain gray ski mask. He held a glass mason jar. He threw the liquid in a wide arc. The acid struck the right side of my face with the physical force of a slap. The heat bloomed instantly. The skin bubbled and hissed, the sound loud in my own ears, like meat hitting a hot skillet. My vision fractured into a kaleidoscope of red and black as the caustic liquid ate through my makeup, my pores, and the flesh beneath. I collapsed onto the wet asphalt. The pain eradicated every thought in my head. I screamed until my vocal cords tore and I tasted blood. My name was Calliope Bayer. I was 22 years old, the heiress to the Bayer shipping fortune, and the newly engaged fiancé to Carmine Lenz, the youngest billionaire in the city. I was beautiful. I was a rising star in a social circle built on flawless appearances and inherited power. The Hudson Syndicate orchestrated the attack. They were a shadow consortium of old money families who controlled the city's ports, its politicians, and its illicit trade. Carmine belonged to them. Renata Prince belonged to them. Edward Pavel belonged to them. They viewed my family's independent control of the docks as a threat, and my impending marriage to Carmine as an unacceptable merger of power. They chose to eliminate me by erasing the one thing my social standing relied upon, my face. I woke up in a sterile white room at St. Jude's private hospital. The air hummed with the steady drone of a heart monitor. Heavy bandages wrapped my head, leaving only my left eye, my nostrils, and my mouth exposed. My father stood by the window, his shoulders sagged. He looked 10 years older. The surgeon explained the damage. Third-degree chemical burns covering the right side of my face and neck, extensive nerve damage, irreversible scarring. The right eye had been spared by millimeters, but the tear duct was destroyed. Carmine never visited. 3 days after the attack, a courier delivered a typed letter. Carmine expressed his deepest sympathies and formally broke the engagement. The Hudson had what they wanted. I was discarded. I spent 4 months in that hospital room. I became a ghost. I stopped speaking to the nurses. I stopped reacting to my father's attempts at comfort. The Calliope who smiled for the paparazzi, who hosted charity galas in silk dresses, died in that alley. The woman who remained existed only in the cold, hollow space where her grief had burned away. On the day of my discharge, I walked into the private bathroom and locked the door. I unwrapped the bandages. The mirror reflected a monster. The left side of my face remained a portrait of a socialite high cheekbone, clear porcelain skin, a striking blue eye. The right side was a landscape of twisted, melted ruin. The skin pulled taut and jagged across my jawline, a mottled canvas of angry reds and dead, shiny pinks. My right lip dragged upward into a permanent, mocking snarl. I traced the ruin with my fingertips. The nerve damage left the area numb to a light touch, yet a deep, throbbing ache resided in the bone. I needed a new face. I commissioned a master artisan in the old quarter of the city. I provided specific instructions and raw materials. A week later, he handed me a box lined with black velvet. I lifted the mask. It was forged from high-grade porcelain, reinforced with a titanium mesh core. It covered the entire upper half of my face, extending down over my right cheek to conceal the worst of the burns, leaving my left jaw and my lips exposed. The porcelain was a pure, flawless white, completely smooth and devoid of expression. The eye holes were perfectly symmetrical. It fastened securely around the back of my head with a series of leather straps and a silver clasp. I strapped the mask onto my face. The porcelain felt cool against my skin. The weight grounded me. The mask stripped away my vulnerability. It offered no emotion, no pain, and no history. Calliope Bayer was dead. The mask was my new truth. I descended into the city's underbelly. The Hudson operated from penthouses and exclusive clubs, but the foundation of their empire rested in the Warrens, a sprawling, subterranean network of black markets, data hubs, and illegal shipping depots. I purchased an abandoned meatpacking warehouse in the Warrens using offshore funds my father had hidden years ago. I hired contractors who asked no questions. We reinforced the steel doors, installed military-grade encryption servers, and soundproofed the interior. This became my war room. I filled the cavernous space with corkboards, whiteboards, and high-resolution monitors. The smell of ozone and old dust permeated the air. I pinned photographs of the Hudson's inner circle to the central board. Carmine Lenz, with his tailored suits and arrogant smile. Renata Prince, the financial architect, cold and precise. Edward Pavel, the enforcer, a brute in a tuxedo. I stretched red yarn between their photos, mapping their connections, their shell companies, their blackmail networks. I spent 18 hours a day in the glow of the monitors. I learned the mechanics of shadow operations. I taught myself to trace encrypted crypto transfers through a dozen different proxy servers. I memorized the patrol routes of the Hudson security teams. I studied the blueprints of their private bank vaults. I needed operatives. I ventured out into the Warrens, dressed in a long black trench coat, my white porcelain mask stark against the gloom. I found a smuggler named Jameson operating out of a rusted shipping container. He owed the Hudson $300,000, a debt they planned to collect in blood. I stepped into his container. The single bare bulb flickered, casting sharp shadows across the smooth white surface of my mask. Jameson reached for a pistol on his desk. I placed a leather briefcase on the metal table between us. I flipped the latches open. Stacks of bundled $100 bills filled the interior. Jameson stared at the money, then at my mask. "Who the hell are you?" I stepped closer. The silence stretched. I reached up and unfastened the silver clasp at the back of my head. I pulled the porcelain mask away from my face. Jameson gasped. He stumbled back, his shoulder hitting the corrugated steel wall. He stared at the twisted, melted flesh, the permanent snarl of my ruined lip. True terror widened his eyes. He recognized the violence inflicted upon me, and he recognized the magnitude of the rage required to survive it. I secured the mask back into place. The blank white porcelain restored my authority. "I am the woman who is going to burn the Hudson to the ground," I said. My voice rasped, the tone flat and mechanical. "You work for me now." He nodded, swallowing hard. My physical trauma became my most potent weapon. I used it to freeze the hearts of the criminals I recruited. I showed them the monster the Hudson created, and they understood I possessed no mercy. I built a network of hackers, thieves, and enforcers. They called me the Madame. 6 months after the attack, I initiated the infiltration. The Hudson hosted the Solstice Gala at the Crystal Pavilion, a massive glass dome overlooking the city. The event gathered the elite politicians, judges, corporate tycoons. Carmine, Renata, and Edward would all be there. I arrived in a sleek, black town car. I wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk. The dress featured long sleeves and a high collar. revealing zero skin. My porcelain mask gleamed under the pavilion's spotlights. A delicate silver chain connected the edge of the mask to a diamond ear cuff. The security guards at the entrance hesitated. I handed them a gold-embossed invitation, forged by my best digital artist. The name read, Madame Blanc, International Benefactor. The doors parted. I stepped into the grand ballroom. The string quartet played a lively waltz. Crystal chandeliers cast fragmented light across the marble floor. Waiters carried trays of vintage champagne. A hush fell over the crowd as I descended the grand staircase. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the blank white face. I felt the weight of their stares, but I felt no fear. The mask shielded me. I was an enigma, an anomaly in their world of predictable vanity. I moved through the crowd with measured steps. I located Renata Prince near the ice sculpture. She wore a red dress and spoke animatedly to a federal judge. I brushed past her. My hand moved with practiced speed. I slipped a microscopic audio transmitter into the folds of her designer clutch. I continued to the VIP lounge. I spotted Edward Pavel leaning against the mahogany bar, drinking scotch. I ordered a glass of water. I stood 3 feet away from him. He stared at the mask, a sneer forming on his lips. "A bit theatrical, isn't it?" Edward asked. I turned my blank face toward him. I remained silent. Edward shifted uncomfortably under the empty stare. He downed his scotch, slammed the glass on the counter, and walked away. While his back was turned, I dropped a custom-coded USB drive near the stool he had occupied, knowing the bartender would toss it into the lost and found bin, where my inside man would plug it into the club's main terminal. Later in the evening, I found Carmine. He stood on the outdoor terrace, overlooking the city skyline. He looked exactly the same, the sharp jawline, the perfectly styled hair, the tailored tuxedo. He held a lit cigarette. I stepped onto the terrace. The cool night air rustled my silk skirt. Carmine turned. He looked at me, his eyes tracking the smooth porcelain. He took a drag from his cigarette. "Madame Blanc, you've caused quite a stir tonight." I stopped 2 feet from him. The man who ordered my destruction stood within arm's reach. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. The urge to drive a blade into his chest surged through my veins, but I suppressed it. Vengeance required patience. "I appreciate a society that values its secrets," I said. My raspy voice disguised any trace of Calliope. "We value order," Carmine corrected. "Secrets are just currency. And your accounts are overdrawn, Mr. Lenz." Carmine frowned, his arrogant facade slipping for a fraction of a second. Before he could respond, I turned and walked back into the ballroom. I planted 7 listening devices, cloned 3 cell phones, and established a direct backdoor into the pavilion's secure network. I transitioned from a victim to a spectator, and now I was the puppet master. I returned to my subterranean war room. I plugged the data streams into my servers. The voices of the elite filled my basement. I listened to judges accepting bribes, politicians trading zoning laws for campaign funds, and the Hudson orchestrating their illegal shipments. I held their lives in the palm of my hand. The systematic collapse began on a Tuesday morning. I stood before the main monitor in the war room. Jameson sat at the primary terminal, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Execute Phase 1, I ordered. Jameson hit the enter key. Digital sabotage struck the Hudson's financial pillars. The custom worm we uploaded at the gala bypassed Renata Prince's firewalls. In a matter of seconds, the worm accessed her offshore shell companies and initiated a massive, decentralized transfer of funds. We drained $400 million from the Hudson's accounts. We scattered the money across 1,000 untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. 30 minutes later, the panic started. I listened through the audio bugs. Renata Prince's voice shrilled over the secure line. The accounts are zeroed. All of them. The Caymans, the Swiss, everything. It's gone, Carmine. We have no liquidity. Carmine sounded breathless. Find it. Get the IT team on it now. They can't. The routing is encrypted beyond anything we've ever seen. We are broke, Carmine. I smiled beneath the porcelain. The physical sabotage followed immediately. I dispatched strike teams to the docks. Edward Pavel oversaw a massive shipment of illegal weapons arriving on a cargo freighter from Eastern Europe. My team bypassed the security perimeter, planted thermite charges on the storage containers, and detonated them simultaneously. The explosion rattled the windows of my war room 5 miles away. The fire burned at 4,000 degrees, melting the steel containers and incinerating $10 million worth of illicit weaponry. The Hudson's primary source of underground muscle evaporated in a cloud of black smoke. I weaponized their secrets. I compiled the audio recordings and the digital ledgers. I created a secure, encrypted website and sent the link to every major news outlet, every federal prosecutor, and every rival crime syndicate in the state. The data dump exposed the politicians in the Hudson's pocket. It revealed the judges who buried their cases. It provided undeniable proof of Carmine Lenz's involvement in extortion, racketeering, and murder. The elite society shattered. The news networks ran continuous coverage. Federal agents raided the Crystal Pavilion and the Hudson's corporate headquarters. The politicians who once drank champagne with Carmine now held press conferences to denounce him. The rival syndicates, sensing weakness, moved in to claim the Hudson's territory. A minor judge, facing 50 years in federal prison for accepting bribes, shot himself in his study. The panic infected every tier of their organization. The Hudson's members turned on each other, offering testimony in exchange for immunity. I cornered them in their fortified sanctuaries. I tracked Renata Prince to a private airstrip on the edge of the city. She paced the tarmac, clutching a briefcase, waiting for a charter jet to take her to South America. My black SUV blocked the runway. I stepped out into the freezing wind. I wore my trench coat and the porcelain mask. My enforcers flanked me, their weapons drawn. Renata dropped her briefcase. Her hand shook. "Who are you? What do you want?" I walked slowly toward her. The wind whipped her hair across her face. "You stole my future, Renata," I said. She stared at the blank white face. Recognition slowly dawned in her eyes. The color drained from her cheeks. "Calliope? No, you're dead." "Calliope is dead," I agreed. "You killed her." My enforcers bound her hands and placed her in the back of the SUV. I left her tied to a chair in the lobby of the FBI field office, with a detailed ledger of her personal crimes resting on her lap. 2 days later, the Hudson's empire lay in ruins. Only Carmine Lenz remained. He retreated to his penthouse, a fortress of steel and glass at the top of the Lenz Tower. He hired private mercenaries to guard the elevators and the stairwells. He sealed himself inside his panic room. He underestimated my network. I bribed the lead engineer who designed his security system. I obtained the master override codes. I bypassed the mercenaries by scaling the exterior of the building using a modified window washing rig. Jameson and 2 of my best operatives accompanied me. We cut through the reinforced glass of his balcony window with a thermal lance. We moved silently through the dark penthouse. The luxury of the space felt hollow, a tomb for a fallen king. We reached the heavy steel door of the panic room. Jameson connected a decryption device to the electronic lock. The keypad glowed green. The heavy bolts retracted with a mechanical thud. I pushed the door open. Carmine sat in a leather chair, staring at the security monitors. The screens showed empty hallways and sleeping guards. He held a glass of scotch in one hand and a revolver in the other. He looked pathetic. His tuxedo jacket was crumpled, his tie undone. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He raised the revolver as I stepped into the room. "Don't," I said. My operatives raised their rifles, aiming directly at his chest. Carmine looked at the lasers painting his shirt, then lowered the gun. He dropped it onto the floor. He stared at my mask. "So, it was you. All of this. The money, the docs, the leaks. You. I took everything you valued," I said. "I dismantled your power. I erased your wealth. I destroyed your face in the eyes of this city." Carmine stood up. His hands trembled. "Calliope, please. It was the syndicate. It was a business decision. I didn't want them to do it. I loved you." The lie echoed in the small room. "You loved the power I brought you," I replied. I stepped closer to him. The fluorescent lights of the panic room reflected off the smooth porcelain of my mask. I reached up and unfastened the silver clasp. I pulled the mask away. Carmine flinched. He squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head away from the ruined flesh, the melted skin, the permanent snarl. He could not look at his own creation. "Look at me," I commanded. He shook his head, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Please, don't." I grabbed his jaw with my left hand. My grip was like iron. I forced his face toward mine. I forced him to open his eyes and witness the horror he orchestrated. Tears spilled down his cheeks. He choked on a sob. The arrogance, the power, the billionaire playboy, it all vanished, leaving behind a weak, terrified man. I released his jaw. I placed the porcelain mask back onto my face, securing the clasp. The blank, perfect white restored the distance between us. "The police are in the elevator," I said. "They have the hard drives from your safe. You will spend the rest of your life in a concrete cell, Carmine. And every time you close your eyes, you will see this face." I turned and walked out of the panic room. I left him sobbing on the floor. I stood atop the ruins of the Hudson Syndicate. I destroyed the people who ruined me. I possessed their wealth, their territory, and their network. I returned to my subterranean war room. I dismissed my operatives. I stood alone in the silence, surrounded by the glowing monitors and the red strings connecting the fallen empire. I achieved absolute vengeance. The city belonged to me. The underworld whispered my name with reverence and fear. The Madame, the masked queen. I walked over to a full-length mirror, leaning against the concrete wall. I looked at my reflection. The black trench coat, the leather gloves, the stark white porcelain mask. I reached up to remove the mask. My fingers brushed the silver clasp, but I stopped. I realized the truth. I did not want to take it off. Calliope Bayer was a victim. She was naive, trusting, and weak. The woman beneath the porcelain was scarred and broken, but the masked queen was invincible. She felt no pain. She commanded loyalty. She controlled the shadows. The moral ambiguity of my new existence settled over me. I eliminated a criminal syndicate, but I replaced it with my own. I utilized extortion, theft, and violence. I became the monster they created, and I discovered I excelled at it. I lowered my hands. The price of my vengeance was complete erasure. My real face would eventually fade from memory. The world would only know the cold, unyielding perfection of the porcelain. I turned away from the mirror and walked toward the command terminal. The war was over, but the reign had just begun. The end.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.